All right, guys, we are live. Wow, this is the Sherdog UFC recap for UFC Vegas 24, UFC on ESPN 22, UFC Whittaker versus Gastelum, UFC Gastelum versus Whittaker, and we might actually also talk about this YouTuber knocking out one-time very competitive, very highly rated MMA star. My name is Keith Shillan. I am your host. Joining me as always is the senior editor of Sherdog.com. He is Ben Duffy. Ben, how you feeling living in a world where Jake Paul massacred Ben Askren?
Well, I mean, if we're going to lead off talking about Paul versus Askren, I said earlier this week that the energy I kind of got from the forums, the Sherdog forums, from Reddit, from MMA Twitter, was kind of, come on, Ben, don't let us down. You're representing MMA. And I can feel that because I remember in 2008 when Brock Lesnar first came to the UFC, his first opponent was going to be Frank Mir. Ironically, Circle of Life. We saw Frank Mir tonight. And I remember, the energy then being, hey, Frank, you're doing this for all of us. Brock Lesnar, we got to show that guy he can't just come over from WWE and walk right in and be at the highest levels of mixed martial arts. It's apples and oranges, considering that Brock Lesnar was obviously an outstanding collegiate wrestler and kind of a generational athlete, but it's the same energy. But at the same time, you couldn't have picked much more of a mismatch and still be able to say, like former UFC contender. Ben Askren, is on the old side. I mean, he had retired before his UFC stint, and relative to his accomplishments in mixed martial arts, he might be like the worst striker of the modern era. Like, he might be the worst striker compared to how good an MMA fighter he was overall in the modern era, period.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
congrats to to Jake Paul, I guess, but
I think about guys like Douglas Lima, who has a loss to Ben Askren, and Jake Paul now has a win. Now, obviously, it's two different sports. I also want to make a shout out to all the people watching this live. Rock the chat. If you have any comments, questions, anything like that, we'll try to get to them. We try to make this as interactive as possible. So this is what I'll tell you about my whole lead up for, I don't know, weeks, months now to the whole Jake Paul, Ben Askren thing. And guys, we're going to do our normal recap. We're going to cover this nonsense very quickly. We're going to do our full UFC recap like we do every single week. My first reaction, well, first, let me back up. And you're talking about people saving, MMAs honor, fighting for their honor. Well, shout out to Randy Couture being pretty much the only guy to not let us down. So shout out to Captain America's. That's why he's my favorite, for keeping our honor. So, I'm a 39-year-old man. I am married. I have 3 children. I am not hip. I know that. I didn't know who Jake Paul was until the whole them making him and his brother making combat and boxing people. I had no idea who the other YouTuber or rapper or whoever that fought I believe it was his brother. That's what kind of started it all. I didn't know it. I didn't tell people were talking about. I was in like an MMA chat and people were talking about it. I'm like, whatever. I didn't have any idea how big this Jake Paul Ben Askren thing was until like 2 or 3 days ago, when like anytime there's a big MMA fight, when there's Conor McGregor or one of these biggest stars, when I started getting the messages from the casuals, my friends that are casuals, when I started getting bombarded with who's going to win. And I was like, I don't really know who Jake Paul is. I don't follow YouTube or TikTok. I don't even know what the hell he's on. I still don't know why he's famous. So my whole reaction was, I'm not going to feed into this. I'm not going to bother. And then I did exactly what I knew I was going to do along. And then I kept looking in our company Slack and kept saying, hey, how many fights until Askren's up? And then when it came time, I I found a way to see it. That's what I will say. And then I saw Ben Askren get knocked out in 1 minute. And just when I thought he couldn't have a more embarrassing loss than the 5-second flying knee knockout to Jorge Masvidal, Ben Askren proved me wrong.
Hey, he's got something new for his low light reel, I guess.
So who's gonna save MMA's honor? Like, can we get somebody to go in there and can we get like Robert Whittaker to fight Jake Paul now? Like, can we have someone safe? You know, I got nothing else to say. Like, I know there was like a full Justin Bieber concert. There was a whole bunch of rappers. I don't know who they were. I got nothing else to say. Like, if you came in for a recap,
I mean, if there are questions about it later in the chat, I'm happy to address them. But that's all I've got to say about it for now.
Yeah, and I'll have Ben comment on it because he's definitely a lot more hip. I mean, look at him; he's got a straight brim hat on, so he obviously is a lot more in with the kids. he's a lot more in with the youth than old man me here. So let's get to now. We talked about the debacle of that. That's not the only debacle that we had. We also had debacles heading into UFC Vegas 24, and I see that people's comments. I see the people watching. If you guys want at the end, we'll jump back in on the action talk. If you guys really want us to, if you have questions or comments, I mean, I don't know why you would ever ask me a question about this, but if you have questions and comments, I'll gladly. I guess we'll talk about it. Someone's saying Conor is next.
Hey, you know what? If Conor loses to Dustin Poirier,
he might be.
it's not out of the realm of possibility because that'll be kind of the next guaranteed big check he can get.
How much does Jake Paul weigh? Like, I don't know. Like, I didn't follow it until
Jake Paul. He's about 190, 200 pound guy.
200. So I mean, he's a lot bigger than Conor.
Yeah, I mean, he was an inch or two taller than Askren. I think he's about 6 feet tall, 6'1". Obviously, didn't need to cut weight for this or anything, but he walks around at a pretty fit, like 195 or 200.
Yeah, but just think about what we're talking about right now. We're talking about.
Yeah, why are we still talking about this shit? Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum.
You know why we're talking about it? Because our views are through the roof right now. That's why. No, I'm just kidding. All right.
I'm gonna choose to believe that in the chat, LOL King Rye is actually Ryan Garcia, like who's blessing us with his presence. Yeah. 191.5. Ryan Garcia.
There you go. 191. I mean. Yeah, all right. So, it's funny as we joke, the Mighty Ruler guy who threw out Conor's name. You might be right, my man. Conor really might be his next opponent, and so be it. I'll take Conor, or maybe I don't know. Maybe it'll be like William Shatner or something. Who knows? All right. So before we talk about Robert Whittaker, we got to talk about UFC. The lead up to UFC Vegas 24. Zara Farn weighed in like a kindergarten student higher than she was supposed to. That didn't happen. But how about... well, you know who might fight Jake Paul next? How about Jeremy Stevens? Because as far as I'm concerned, Jeremy Stevens maybe shouldn't have a job with the UFC anymore. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, the co-main event was canceled because Jeremy Stevens pushed Jakar Close, and somehow Jakar Close received an injury.
Yep. Like he went to the hospital. He, sprained his neck. I don't know how he did from that shove, but ultimately, dude, Jeremy put his hands on him. Those are those were the consequences. That was the outcome. It's kind of refreshing to know that in 2021, in the era of COVID, where COVID is shaking up cards left and right, that Jeremy Stevens is an idiot is still like a valid way for UFC cards to get messed up, because it's like 10 years ago now almost that he was in jail for punching somebody in a bar like day before he was supposed to fight, and Dana White was like, he's fighting on this card. I don't know what those media people are telling you. And of course he isn't fighting on the card. He's in jail.
Honestly, I forgot about that. I forgot that Jeremy Stevens, like 2 days before the card, he was in jail. One thing I'll say, like, we were leading into this fight saying, other than the main event, nothing was really out there to help us, get excited for the card other than the main event. But then the push actually got me a little excited. Like, you know me, like, you don't need drama. Like, you're pretty drama free. You can get excited. I love the drama. We know this. Like, I love the trash talk. I love the drama. I probably would be a Jake Paul fan if I followed it based on, I know he trash talks and everything. So I got excited for a fight, and then it didn't happen.
Yep.
When they started talking about, I started the broadcast, and there was like a half hour of talk before it even started, and they said, oh, down to 10 fights. I'm like, oh no, we lost another fight, and I go jokingly like, watch it to be either main or co-main event, like the only 2 fights I'm really interested in, and there we go. Anyways, let's move on. Let's actually move on to the action we saw in the main event. We were waiting 2 years for Robert Whittaker to face Kelvin Gastelum, and I had a little doubt on Robert Whittaker beforehand. I said he hasn't looked his best. Well, he looked better than ever tonight. That was one of the best performances. He clean sweeped the cards. I mean, I'll let you take the floor first. Just talk about Robert Whittaker.
He himself looked fantastic. Just in a vacuum, you take Gastelum out of the cage and you just look at Whittaker's motion, his technique. He looked sensational. Any lingering concerns about his health? He's had knee problems. He had obviously the sports hernia or the inguinal hernia that put off their last fight. Obviously, a guy that fights like Whittaker does, he's going to fall off a cliff at some point. But as of right now, he looks absolutely prime physically. He fought a fantastic game plan, just a perfect game plan. You mentioned in the preview that everything starts off of his jab.
Yeah.
But when Gastelum was surprisingly aggressive with his forward motion, like right off the opening bell, he adjusted quickly and he ran him right onto his right cross like 2 or 3 times in the first half of the first round. And that's a fantastic adjustment. When you've got a pretty quick on his feet guy that's charging at you. And he started pumping the jab later, but he was like, okay, if you're going to run at me, I'm going to hit you with the punch that you're going to be on the end of. Brilliant. Also, when did he turn into John Jones?
I know.
Like he used that underhook and tip you over takedown and just dumped Gastelum hard and landed in side control twice in the first round. That's not something you usually see from Whittaker. He's actually a guy who, considering he comes from a place that doesn't really have the amateur wrestling structure of the United States, he shoots pretty traditional takedowns when he wants a takedown. But tonight he did the John Jones thing. It worked because John Jones is almost always the taller fighter. Robert Whittaker almost never is, and that's a much easier takedown to get when you're the taller fighter because you're not having to do some crazy judo foot sweep. You're basically just kind of tipping him over. If you can get the underhooks, you're physically have a strong upper body, which he does, and you're the taller guy. He did it. It worked like a charm. Like, I was shocked at how easily he took Gastelum down pretty much any time he wanted.
Yeah.
You said, and I completely agreed with you, that his takedown defense is legendary.
That's right.
One of my questions going in was will Gastelum be able to get him down, either because that's where he wants his offense or because he's getting stuff he doesn't like from Whittaker on the feet. Not only did Gastelum have a hard time getting Whittaker down, but Whittaker's offensive wrestling was on another level.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of people talking in the chat. I just want to address them. Guys, we'll continue to talk about the Askren thing at the end. I love that people have thrown out names who Jake Paul should fight next. Keep throwing them out there, and maybe we'll pick what's the most realistic one. Like, don't obviously people gotta throw some joke ones in there, but maybe we'll stay to see who can actually pick his next opponent, and we'll talk about that at the end. I also want to make a shout out to Alberto Rafael Golarto Ordez. He says he's speaking in Spanish, but he puts Venezuela, so I'm assuming he's saying he's in Venezuela. So
greetings from Venezuela.
Yeah, that's pretty cool if you're in Venezuela watching.
Alberto, saludos desde Texas.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so we talked about the jab, and obviously the jab was very effective, but I think you're on something. When I was talking about Robert Whittaker, I said everything comes off the jab, and that was like his number one tool, and I thought it was going to be his number one tool. If I was ranking his tools tonight, I think it was 7th or 8th down the list, and I'm not saying like the jab wasn't effective. I just mean like everything was effective for Robert Whittaker. He had so much variety. He had Kelvin Gastelum guessing. You talked about that Kelvin Gastelum came out like very aggressive, came out right out the gate, which is kind of, I thought was a good strategy, like in theory, because Whittaker's been hurt early in fights, try to get ahead. Gaslam is kind of a fast starter. So I thought it was a good idea. I was so impressed, and Michael Bisping talked about this, it was how well Robert Whittaker can fight off his back foot. That is such a incredible technical skill that very few people can do. Be pressured, kind of fighting off your back foot, and landed. And he was counter-striking. He was landing power shots at will. His right hand, as you talked about, his right hand was absolute money. Like, he was catching him. I think he was faster than I've seen him look in the longest time. That high kick combo, we've talked about the high kick combo, but that was the best I've ever seen. And that had to do with being, going against the southpaw. Obviously, everything coming from the right side against the southpaw is more effective. He started chopping down the leg kicks. As you said, early he was coming in, grabbing double underhooks, taking him down. But then, what I loved at the very end, then he shot your regular, drop step in on the hips, take him down that way. Like, we saw so much from him. It was absolutely sensational. Like, when I'm thinking about performances from Robert Whittaker, one thing we talked about is like his last 6 or 7 fights, even though he's won all but one of them, he was hurt in almost every one of them. That was not the case. This was a shutout. This was like a Jake DeGrom performance, or Pedro in 1999 performance. This was sensational.
It was. I mean, when you look at him at the end of the fight, his face is a little marked up. He's a little bloody, a little bruised, but that is a Robert Whittaker shutout because he's not an Israel Adesanya or Anderson Silva where he gets into this flow state and the other guy just can't even touch him. Robert Whittaker thrives on creating collisions where he hits you harder and more often than you hit him. Like, his perfect combination, he expects to get hit glancing with something. He's going to catch something because he's creating a collision. So Gastelum put hands on him a few times, but he was never hurt. And it was a Robert Whittaker shutout. I'm a little dinged up, but I landed like just literally 20 times as much offense on you as you did on me.
Yeah. When you watched this, did you say to yourself, like, this is what would have happened 2 years ago when they were supposed to fight?
I think I favored him at the time, but he did better tonight than he would have then. He's just a better fighter now. I think he is an improved fighter since the Adesanya loss.
We try to keep the people in the chat active. It's been asked like 10 times, so we get past it. Do you think the Ben Askren fight was rigged? I don't.
Why would you bother rigging it? I think Paul would have crushed him in a fair fight or a rigged fight.
And I don't think Ben got paid very well. He didn't get paid enough to rig a fight.
Oh, we got a Charlie Z sighting. Charlie Zelenoff has been smoked out of the woodwork. I don't know if it's real Charlie Z. I mean, he's too busy getting his record to like 510-0 instead of 509-0. But he wants Charlie Z versus Jake Paul. I will buy that on pay-per-view. Anytime you get Charlie Z in an enclosure that he cannot run out of, and like he actually has to like get his ass whooped, I will pay the $50 for that.
Yeah, that actually probably could happen. That one actually that's leading. I think that's leading the pack for most likely opponent for Jake Paul next. Speaking of likely opponents, let's go back to Kelvin Gastelum versus Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker, you said it was like his best fight. I think it was his best performance of his entire career tonight against a good guy. Just his speed, his technical skills. I love the balance between wrestling and striking. I think that's the ultimate blend of a fighter. That's why guys like John Jones in his heyday was so good. A guy like George St. Pierre was the ability to balance. That's what we saw. That said, does a fight with Israel Adesanya look any different than the first time?
It might look a little different. The new Whittaker mindset, I like it because we talked about, and you pointed out on the preview, that his kind of that warrior need to like get it back when he gets tagged. I mean, it's never a good idea, but it's suicide against Israel Adesanya, who's already thinking 2 moves ahead of you. Just avoiding that will at least make it not like a round and a half face planting. It's still a bad matchup for Whittaker, but ultimately I saw enough tonight that I want to see the rematch, because the thing is, for me, it's not based on, okay, do I think he'll beat Adesanya now? I mean, if he's earned the right to try again, it's not for me to predict whether he's going to do it or not, or at least it's not for me to predict and have that, decide whether he gets the match or not. He's done enough. He's certainly done more than Marvin Vettori.
Okay, well, we're going to debate that in a little bit, but...
Oh, okay.
I agree that... So what I'll say about this, like, I don't know if... I took Adesanya to win the first time. Obviously, he had an incredible performance himself, made us talk about, like, why would things look any different moving forward. Then I said, like, okay, so we have that, but why would it be different? And I still don't know if it would be different, but it's Robert Whittaker, so I'll never count him out. Because I picked him to win this fight, but I wasn't super confident, and then he blew the doors off of Calvin Gastelum. And you talked about, thing we talked about in the preview, and if all you guys watching, we preview all the cards, so make sure you check out the Sherdog page where me and Ben do a full breakdown. We believe it's the most in-depth breakdown on the internet. What we were going to say is, you don't beat a sniper by, you think about war. You think about, World War II and the sniper up in the tower. You don't beat the sniper by rushing the building. You beat the sniper by getting a shot in that window. You watch the old Band of Brothers, someone cover fires and then your own sniper takes him out. Like, that's how you beat Israel Adesanya. Or you completely change the game plan. I love that fact that we saw wrestling from Robert Whittaker. Maybe we see wrestling. We saw how wrestling worked for Jan Blachowicz, and I would say Robert Whittaker is a better wrestler than Jan Blachowicz. Now, obviously, he doesn't have the size advantage that Jan Blachowicz has on Israel Adesanya, but maybe that's the route he goes. Maybe he completely changes up. So while I would still favor Israel Adesanya moving forward, I'm definitely way more intrigued now than I was an hour ago before the fight started. Now, you're saying Robert Whittaker should be next? Are you saying Israel Adesanya should defend the title against Robert Whittaker?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Again, it feels, their first fight feels more recent than it really was, just because it was such a shocking outcome. Just Adesanya looked to be on such a different level, especially as the fight kind of went on. But yeah, I think Whittaker's done enough to earn another shot. And like you, I don't think I favor him, but I think he'll do better. And Adesanya is coming off his first career loss. Like, who knows what that does to him?
Yeah. So the way I feel about it is, Vettori's on a longer winning streak. For the level of competition, like, you could argue, who beat the better competition. I would say they're close. Like, you might say, oh, I think, Gastelum and Till and Cannonier is a better 3-fight stretch than, who was it? Holland, Hermanson, and whoever was before that. I don't remember. But the point is that they're in the same realm. If we had a room of 10 MMA fans, not all 10 is going to say, oh, yeah, this one definitely had the better resume during this run. I also feel like their first fight was more competitive. Now, we've talked and said, well, it wasn't as competitive as people remember. And I just feel like it's his time. He'll sell the fight better than Robert Whittaker will. I mean, even today when Askren was, I'm talking about Askren because that's what the chat's going crazy about. But when Adesanya, get a little jab at him, like, good job, son, like saying, like, I'm your daddy. He kind of did what Robert Whittaker does. Last up, like, well, he beat me. Well, that's why he's having a little fun with it. Like, that's not what Vettori would do. Vettori will go crazy and right out.
Yes.
right out. And I also think you don't have to always rush the big fight. Like, you can sit on it a little bit. If Whittaker is the more challenging one, we can still sit on that. So, for me, I would do Vettori. That's the fight I would do next.
Then what do you do with Whittaker?
I put him again. I rematch him with Derek Brunson. And that, to me, is now the number one contender matchup. And it's a redemption story for either one. Whoever wins is back in the title fight again. Well, I mean, I know Brunson didn't fight for the title, but he did fight Adesanya. And it's a redemption story. The winner would now fight either Adesanya or Vettori if Vettori wins. That's the route I would do. I know I'm in the minority. People are going crazy based on Whittaker's performance. People were tweeting at me like the fight should have already been made already. He shouldn't have to win this much. He was, defending champion. Had a pretty decent run as the champion. I know I'm in the minority, but that's what I would do.
There are some ridiculous suggestions in the chat. Gervonta Davis versus Jake Paul. So we got like 5'2", like Gervonta. I'm just dying like thinking about that. Someone said Ben Duffy versus Jake Paul.
That's my favorite song.
Yeah, I'm A-okay. I am older than he is. I am smaller than he is. He actually trains actively. I'm making fun of the stupidity of the fight, but I'm not saying I want that smoke necessarily.
You think you don't want the smoke?
No, well, MMA, sure. Let's do it. I'm sure I can double leg him and give him some. I'll probably just get the forearm on neck submission, but
a straight boxing match with
no.
Snoop Dogg,
me, hell no.
Snoop Dogg and Mario Lopez commentating, and Snoop Dogg screaming like, "Where's my money when you get knocked out?"
It sounds like a fever dream.
I mean, I would do it. I mean, depending on how much they get. I mean, I know I'm not a Ben Askren star, so I'm not going to pull that $500,000 he did. But if you give me enough money to pay off my house, I would do it, and I would sell the shit out of that thing too. You know me, I'll trash talk too.
Yep.
Oh. That obviously we're not getting the call. No. And shout out to all the fighters out there. If you're a B-level fighter, don't bother tweeting, "Come get the smoke" to Jake Paul and this that. You're not going to get a fight. Like I have a friend who's like a kickboxer, and he's a good kickboxer. He fights on like. You're not getting the call. Don't call him out. Don't tag him. It's not going to happen. So, there's probably like 5 MMA fighters that even has a chance to get the call. Conor. Who else? Maybe one of the champions, Adesanya. Maybe Masvidal. Honestly, maybe Colby Covington. But there's not many. There's not many that would get the call. Like someone's talking about Tyron Woodley. Like Tyron Woodley's not getting the call.
Nope.
Anyways, what do we do with Gastelum? So we decided to matchmaking Jake Paul for a second. Gastelum, he's been near the top. He's been close. Ooh, Nick Diaz. That one actually does make sense. That actually makes sense. That's a good call there, Boone. Boone
Jake
Blizzard.
Paul, not for Kelvin Gastelum. Okay.
Not for Kelvin Gastelum. I'm talking about Jake Paul. Yeah.
I think Gastelum actually needs a step back. When you step back, you're like, okay, his only win in his last 4 fights is against Ian Heinisch. I like Ian Heinisch. He's a real solid like UFC roster guy, but he's not a top 15 fighter. And he had a pretty competitive fight with Gastelum, and that's Gastelum's only win in the last like 2-3 years. He needs a step back. Like if they insist on giving him another top 10-ish guy, at least give him someone like Kevin Holland, who has some flaws in his game. And he's coming off a couple losses, but his name is still up there. If you just hate Kelvin Gastelum, I guess you could do like Jared Cannonier or something.
Yeah.
But I would be fine with Gastelum heading back down to the lower reaches and get someone who's just outside the top 15 but winning fights. Like, Gerald Meerschaert just fought tonight.
Yeah, that's exactly like the range of fighter that I'm thinking of. The name I came up with is I thought of Krzysztof Jotko, Sean Strickland winner. They're fighting early next month. That's the matchup I would do. They would kind of be close to the same timeline.
That I like that because both those guys have some momentum. Like Strickland was low key one of the stories of last year.
Yeah.
I mean, he got left in the dust by kind of like the Chimaevs and at the time Hollands, Joaquin Buckley's, but he came back out of nowhere and looked sensational after like what could have been a career-ending. He's got some juice. Like, yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like we've talked about before. I think about the escalator. Where do they meet? Like, I don't feel like Mershad has reached the escalator where Gastelum is, but I feel like the winner of that matchup would definitely be in. I think it's time to move on. We've already spent 35 minutes on the main event. Sort of. Before that,
the main events plural.
Yeah, and guys, this is not a pay-per-view card. Next week's card will go much more in depth. I mean, we have 3 title fights. We're gonna do. That's gonna be a much better, a longer recap. The rest of these fights don't have much to say in the rankings. But Andrealowski versus Chase Sherman. Andrealowski won a unanimous decision. First question, do you agree with the decision?
Even as someone who picked Sherman coming in, I have no problem with this decision. Like, watching Sherman, I've realized what it is that bothers me about him. And this is not me calling a fighter's heart into question or calling a fighter scared or anything. Like, that's not for me to do, like, out of my office chair. Anyone who gets in there, like, under those lights, you know, punching someone out for money, they've got heart. They've got much more heart than the average person. But what I'll say is, when Chase Sherman loses, like this fight, he had to know he was losing, and he just never flipped it into another gear.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not exclusive to kind of mid-level guys like him. Last night, I watched Phil Davis, one of the greatest light heavyweights of this era, and I was like, Phil Davis is losing these rounds, and he is not going to change anything.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny you bring up Phil Davis, and obviously we're not going to go down Bellator too much. But like when he picked it up at the end of the fight, he actually was doing very well, but he was stuck in that gear. Now, to me, there was like a turning point. The turning point was between the first and second round. Chase Sherman came out great. He pressured Arlovski, forced him on his back foot, similar to what Gastelum was trying to do to Whittaker, but it was actually working out. And it almost looked like he wasn't going to get out of the first round. Then Arlovski recovered and kind of just started going back to the basics. He started working a jab. He had a little bit of a speed advantage. We talked about Chase Sherman being a stationary target in front of you, so he's kind of very easy to hit. He started jabbing him, started getting on his bike a little bit. He went from being forced onto his heels, you know, a lot of times you see back foot is when you kind of get forced back in the heels, to on his toes. Now, Arlovski's at this point in his career still a little flat-footed, so yeah, he wasn't moving out around there like Whittaker, but you know, got onto his toes, started adding the leg kicks, and that to me is what really changed Sherman, because one, his legs started taking a lot of damage, so that obviously slows down, you know, his movement forward. It also, obviously, you start losing your legs, you start losing your power. But also, when he was coming in to try to pressure, he was eating a jab. And it was just a little adjustment from Arlovski, and the whole, like, tide of the fight just turned. It was last 10 minutes. Like, I thought when people were debating it on Twitter, I thought it was a pretty easy decision for Arlovski. I thought he clearly, I don't want to say clearly, the third round was kind of close, but the second round I thought was pretty much Arlovski's, and then I favored him in the third round. I felt very comfortable like that he was going to win that decision, and all three fighters said that. That said, Arlovski's talking about fighting another 2 more years. Like, why can't guys retire like on a win? I mean, we're going back to the Jake Paul thing. Like, we have Evander Holyfield coming out of retirement 10 years after his last fight, and he's like, he's legit like almost 60 years old. I forgot how old he is, but he's like 56, 57 years old. Like, I don't want to see this anymore. Like, just win a fight and go out.
I'm with you, but just like, you know, I said I'll never call like the heart or, you know, of a professional fighter into question or say so and so is scared. I'm not wired to understand why so many of them can't walk away.
Yeah.
You know, like in some cases it's pretty easy to understand. It's money.
Money. Yeah.
But I don't think it's money for Arlovski. And yeah, I do not get it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not. It's not structured like your football and your NBA, where well, obviously you don't make as much money as those guys do, not even close. But also, there's things in place for football. You know, the major sports, NBA, MLB. I'm sure the European soccer leagues are similar. They also have positions where they really have advisors to this. Like, who's advising fighters to be wise with their money? Who's talking about mutual funds, talking about hey, don't buy a new car, like pay your house off, or
Yep.
like pay start a college fund for your children. Like I don't know if they're doing that. I mean, I guess it would come down to the managers. And I'm not saying, and neither one of us are saying that Arlovski's broke or anything like that, but I'm talking about MMA fighters in general. I mean, you've heard the horror stories about guys being broke.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's move on. I don't think there's anything else to talk about. I still view Arlovski at this point as a lower level UFC heavyweight. To me, the worst performance of the entire night, besides Ben Askren on the UFC card, Abdul Razak Alhassan. He moved up in weight, and he looked worse than ever. Jacob Malkoun just turned it into a Greco-Roman wrestling match where he got double underhooks, took him down, and Alhassan had no strategy. I thought it was a perfect strategy from Malkoun. I'm surprised he could implement it that way, but he just kept moving forward, got takedowns, and unless Alhassan fixes his wrestling, like you're going to see this a lot more going forward.
I agree, and again, we're talking about somebody who was a nationally ranked judo practitioner, and even if like judo and MMA wrestling don't correspond 1-to-1,
Sure.
usually when you get a high level judoka, they at least have really great core strength and just a natural ability to kind of drop their center of gravity. They understand leverage and balance really, really well. Alhassan just doesn't exhibit any of that in the cage. And worse yet, I completely credit Malkoun's wrestling, especially in the second and third rounds.
Yeah.
But in the first round, Alhassan was overswinging so badly on his haymakers that he was practically turning his back to him. Like Malkoun he had 4 takedowns in the first round, and at least 2 of them, he just walked straight up, hugged Alhassan, and just tripped him over because Alhassan was turned half away from throwing a massive looping punch. It was just inviting the takedown.
Yeah. No, you're dead on. I was going to say that. And also, like, if you can't defend a takedown with, whizzers, with hipping in, stuff like that, like in general wrestling, there's another way guys are effective, someone like a Giga Kasasi, and that's with your footwork. And Adesanya's footwork was terrible. He wasn't using lateral movement. He was backing straight up. He was staying, as Dominic Cruz kept pointing out, he was staying between the cage and that first black line. He was setting it up. He was not only was he not defending those takedowns, but he was helping in getting taken down. To me, it was a terrible strategy. Just an awful, like, if I was grading fighters, I would have given him an F for today. Like, that was the one thing you can't do, he did. Just, to me, it was absolutely awful. He's 0-3 now since his return, after his court battle and everything. He's now 0-3. Like, not looking good for Alhassan. Let's move on. In my opinion, probably the best fight of the night. Do we have the awards yet? Do you know?
Yes, we have the awards.
We'll pause, we'll pause for a second. You tell us, see if I was right.
Fight of the night, Whittaker versus Gastelum.
Oh. Favoring the main event. Okay. I wouldn't have done that, but.
Performances of the night, Tony Gravely and Gerald Meerschaert.
Okay. I understand
that.
So
at least both those went to the undercard?
Yeah, I understand that because I was trying to guess, and I was like, well, Whittaker is going to get one performance, and then I'm like, it's going to be tough to pick between Gravely and Meerschaert. Well, if you give the fight of the night, then you get all 3. I thought the fight of the night was Tracy Cortez versus Justine Kish. That was a split decision for Tracy Cortez. I picked Justine Kish to pull off a massive upset. Yep. It didn't happen that way, though Twitter was pretty split down the middle who won. 50% for Cortez, 50% for Kish. I didn't pick it right, but I felt like I did. Like, even though I lost, I felt the way I broke it down was correct.
Yes, the way you broke it down was correct. You were the only one on the Sherdog staff, like of the 18 people in the
Makes me even
pick'em,
more mad.
that actually went with Kish over Cortez, even though everyone I talked to was kind of like, I think we need to tap the brakes on Tracy Cortez a little bit. You know, I hate using the word overrated because it sounds like a personal insult. But you know what? If everybody thinks you're the number 5 fighter in the division and you're actually like the number 8, you're overrated. It doesn't mean you're bad. You're still really good. It's just you're overrated. Tracy Cortez came into this a little overrated, and whether you thought she won or not, there were some problems exposed.
Yeah.
I thought.
She's a great wrestler. She showed it today. She had good hip control, good ground control. Even one point where she reversed a takedown, the Kish was going to take her down. Mm-hmm. She has that, but she's slow on the feet. We talked about that on Victor, and we saw it again. I mean, Justine Kish had a really big advantage striking, and if she turned it up in the third round more, she might have won that fight. Like the last 30 seconds, if she kind of flirted, she probably was going to win that fight. I don't know if she thought she was ahead. She kept that same pace throughout the whole fight, where I felt like, okay, like step on the gas and you're going to win. That said, she was terrible in the first round because we talked about the one way to beat Tracy Cortez is move and jab and land punches. And what did she do? She got in the clinch. And I'm like, what? Why would you initiate the clinch? That's the one area you're supposed to stay away. And I didn't like that. I love so someone's like taking a jab at us saying, obese people talking about fighting. Laugh my ass off. So we work for Sherdog. You can Google my name. I have a fight record. Do you? I actually have fought, and I'm undefeated, by the way. So check it out. But shout out to that person. And Ben was a wrestler and stuff, so whatever. Anyways, do you feel like a lot of people could be jumping off Tracy Cortez's bandwagon? Like
no,
you feel like,
dude. I feel like nobody watched this. Like I think the Triller card just buried this as far as eyeballs go.
Absolutely.
So all people are going to do is go back and see, yeah, Cortez won a decision. Kish is a tough veteran. Hey, Cortez survives and advances.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And it also, she is young, so I'm not going to jump. I wasn't on the bandwagon, but I'm not like burying her. But I'll say this, like, she is young. She definitely has talent. She is probably elite in the wrestling. She's elite in the wrestling. And
she's young in miles. She's 27.
Well, I would say that
she feels prospecting.
Okay, yeah, you're right. That's a good call. She's probably, I would say she's probably in the prime years, but still in the earlier part of the prime years. Like prime would probably say like 26 to 32-ish. I'm not, obviously everybody's a little different, but the mass majority is that range. There's some good to take out of this. It was a early UFC career fight. It was a battle tested. She still found a way to win. So there is a lot of positives to take. But that said, like, I felt like I won people that she ain't that. I don't think she's that good. I feel like I kind of was proven right. I mean, she almost lost to a very low-level UFC fighter. And I looked at MMA Decision. It was like pretty much 50-50 who people thought won. Mm-hmm. And Twitter was the same way. And this was a beginning of, I shouldn't say the beginning, it was the end because we're going in reverse order, but this was 4 straight split decisions. Another one that people were very upset about, and this is the one I actually thought they had the wrong decision, is Alex Munoz versus Luis Pena. Luis Pena won a split decision. I had it 29-28 for Munoz. I gave him the first round. I had him losing the third. Obviously, I had him losing the third. How did you score it?
I scored it exactly the same as you did. I gave Munoz the first 2 rounds, gave Pena the third. So I disagree with the decision, but I'm not mad. because you know what? Basically, every minute of that fight that Munoz lost, he is because he just let it go.
Yeah.
He gave away, I felt, the third round, and he gave away the parts of the first and second that were like close.
Sure.
I still think he's a better fighter than Luis Pena, but yeah, I don't think he pushed his wrestling advantage, as much as he could have.
Yeah.
And especially in the third round, like Pena started tagging him up on the feet.
Yeah, he really struggled with the range of Pena in the third. Like Pena got to about the third round is when he started finding his own range. And when you have a long strike like that, it's hard to get underneath them. And I think that's kind of what happened. Plus, Munoz kind of at that point he looked like he was breathing pretty hard. I mean, all the punches he was laying on his feet was hard punches, which is why I gave it to him. I felt like I was very surprised how this fight played out, and what I mean by that is Munoz did a much better, especially in the first 2 rounds, on the feet than I expected him. Like he was landing power shots, and then in the wrestling, the takedowns were a lot tougher for him to get Pena down than I expected. So it was like, I don't know if it was Pena was just so ready for the wrestling that's what opened up the striking, but kept him safe in the wrestling. I don't know, but it was completely opposite what I expected. I mean, what do you think?
He had a little more difficulty with the wrestling than I expected, but I still felt as though he had the advantage there. But yeah, he was landing punches that were Pena was feeling him. Like I don't know if he was like hurt and in danger at any point, but Pena did not like what he was getting.
No.
And that's kind of what I alluded to on the preview, where Pena does best when he is the better wrestler. Yeah. When he either knows he can get the fight to the ground because that's where he thinks his best offense lies, or when he knows he has it as a safety valve if he doesn't like what he's getting on the feet. He did not like what he was getting on the feet from Munoz, and he didn't even really try to bring it to the ground. Maybe he was just assuming I can't take this guy down. He's the wrestling coach of Team Alpha Male. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, just a tough fight to call. MMA decisions. I checked out MMA decisions. It was 11-5 for Munoz. So the majority of the MMA decisions, and if people don't know what we're talking about, MMA decisions is a website that takes media members' scorecards. I submitted my scorecard all through the entire event. Ben, I don't think you did this card, but a lot of times you do.
I didn't tonight, so it would have been 12-5.
Yeah. One guy asked if we can talk about Jake Paul instead of people we don't know. This is the UFC recap, so we're talking about UFC, but we did talk about Jake Paul for about the first 20 minutes of the show.
And I'm sure we'll come back and talk more about it later.
I'm sure we'll talk more about it. We gave like 20 minutes. When it's all done, rewind the broadcast. We talked about Jake Paul. And one thing I want to say about Pena versus Munoz, even though I thought on a 10-9 must system that Munoz won, under Pride or One Championship rules, I think Pena won. Like he won the fight. If you judge it as a whole, like his third round was more dominant than anything that happened in the first 2 rounds, but that's not how it was based on. Speaking of rules, the most controversial fight of the night, Juan Espino versus Alexander Romanov. Romanov won a technical decision. I don't remember the last time that has happened. Do you know? Has it? I don't remember it happening.
It has happened. They mentioned it on the broadcast, and I cannot remember which fight they were referring to, but it was at least 5 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember, but yeah, it's been a really long time, and people don't know what we're talking about. What happened was it was a very competitive fight. He got into the third round. In the third round, Juan Espino kneed Alexander Romanov in the groin so hard that Romanov couldn't continue. But under MMA rules, if you start the third round, you actually go to a decision. And you actually score the first 2 rounds and the third round. Which goes back to what we always talk about. MMA rules is just plain old, excuse my language, fucked up. How could we possibly score? Like, I think it was like 1 minute and 10 seconds or something. So completely ignore the remaining 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Like, that doesn't count. Like, why do we have to... Like, it's easy to follow football. It's easy to follow basketball. Like, why does MMA make it so difficult? Like, who's more hardcore than us? We do a live broadcast after the show. Every single week. We do a live preview show where we break down the fights and go wicked in depth, and we spend hours and hours of doing film study. And, like, I still don't even know if I know all the rules. Like, that's a problem.
Jay Petrie, Sherdog associate editor and the best stats and trivia man in the industry, says the last technical decision in the UFC was Daniel Omielanchuk versus Jarvis Danho back in 2016. Danho took a groin shot early in the third round. It went to the judges. He lost a majority technical decision.
Was that his last fight before the big long layoff, and then he came back and?
God, was he gone for 4 years with a nut shot? That poor guy.
He came back and knocked out Jorgen de Castro. So by the rules, I had Ospina winning. If you go by the rules, now I don't agree that we should have went with. I don't believe you should score the third round. I think you should score the first two. If it's 2-0, that guy wins. If it's 1-1, it's a draw. I don't care if there's 30 seconds left in the third round. That's just how I feel. Obviously, that's not how it goes. But based on the rules, I thought Ospina was winning the third round.
So do I, and I know that I said off the top that I'm not going to call any fighter's heart into question, and damn if this isn't making it hard for me. So I'm instead going to call Romanov's brains into question, because I'm happy to call fighters dumb. Because, I mean, he's laying there, and again, I'm not the guy that got hit. I have no idea how bad he was hurt, but he's laying on his back. He's huffing and puffing. Note that he was by far the more tired of the two fighters.
Yeah.
So the 5-minute break definitely benefits him more, but he literally asks the referee through his translator, what will happen if I don't continue? And they're like, it'll go to the judges. And he decides, fuck it, I'm going to roll the dice with the judges. Even he had to know he was probably going to lose the decision, but he chose that over take the full 5 minutes and at least try to get back up and finish the fight. It was nuts.
I like it.
No pun intended, sorry.
Yeah, I'm not going to question his toughness either. I mean, he got kneed by a UFC heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
He might not have been physically able to continue. Is his brain working full capacity at that point? I know I've been kneed in the nuts by my 6-year-old son, and it's hard to think at that point. Never mind Juan Espino, 260-pound elite athlete. I don't know, but it worked out for him. If we want to talk about, we actually didn't talk about the action. The action I thought was pretty much a Greco-Roman wrestling matchup. Espino got more takedowns in the first round. Romanov had more takedowns in the second round. And they started the third round.
They started the third round, and I thought Espino was probably going to win that round just by being the much fresher guy. But we'll never know. And Romanov stays undefeated, I guess. Like, great.
Yeah. Speaking of long layoffs, Jessica Pena returned after 4 years against Lupita Godinez. I said this was going to be a thrashing. I thought Godinez was going to absolutely wipe the floor with Jessica Pena. Boy, was I wrong. Pena won a split decision. This was the first split decision they go on our 4 fights in a row split decision. I'm glad to see Pena win based on all the things that she dealt with. That said, well, first of all, who did you have winning? I'll start with me. I gave it to Pena. I thought she won the first and second round and lost the third.
I gave Godinez the second and third round, so I had her winning. But the second round was a toss-up. I'm not mad at the other one at all. And basically the same thing I said about the later women's fight, Kish versus Cortez, only more so. Ultimately, regardless of how I feel about the decision, Godinez deserved to lose.
Yes. I'm glad you said
that. The difference in athleticism was shocking.
Yes.
Considering how much smaller Godinez was, how effortlessly, and I said it kind of might look like Pena versus Danielle Taylor, where just a much smaller but more explosive woman was able to bounce into range, tag her up, take her down, just kind of had her way with her just on athleticism. Godinez did mostly the same thing, but Godinez, this was a big step up in competition for her compared to, like, Vanessa Demopoulos is the only other really even decent fighter she's fought. And she's still doing things that work on athleticism on like the LFA prelims level. Like the fact that she kept trying the stupid headlock throw and Pena just made her pay for it every time, and she never stopped doing it. First time she did it, Pena went out the back door, took her back.
She kept sidestepping her hip over and over again, sidestepping her hip.
All you need to do. And
she has the long enough legs where she and the other girl, it was like the perfect balance because Godinez was short enough where she could get over the hip and also get her leg all the way wrapped around, and she kept doing it, and that she did it the first 2 rounds. And what drove me crazy is because Godinez, the way she fought, you mentioned it, the way she fought Vanessa Demopoulos in her last fight, she did not want to go to the ground with her. She avoided the clinch at all costs. She moved. It would have worked the same way against Jessica Pena. When she actually opened up on the feet, she was tagging her, piecing her up. Well, then she started doing these slams, but not covering her, not doing anything. Like, yeah, Jessica Pena is a pretty good grappler, but she's not Ryan Hall. She's not Dave Maya. You can go to the ground with her. She pick her up, slam her super hard, and then do nothing. And I'm like, all you're doing is wasting your energy.
It wasn't even a slam half the time. Like a couple times, she just threw her halfway across the octagon and didn't even follow her. It was hilarious, but it didn't win her the fight.
I just thought it was a terrible. I mean, she kept clinching with her for no reason when she could have been opening up. Just a terrible decision on her part. Now going back to MMA decisions, I gave it to Pena. I was in the minority. MMA decisions had 11-6 for Godinez, obviously counting me of one of the 6 people who gave it to Pena. Before that, there was no controversy in who won this fight, as Gerald Meerschaert put Bartosz Fabinski to sleep with a guillotine choke. It was a very quick fight. And I want to give Meerschaert a lot of credit because he took a chance. When a guy shoots on your hips and you jump for a guillotine, if you miss it, if he pops his head out, you're on bottom. You helped the takedown be even more easy. So I give him a lot of credit. That said, Fabinski made a huge mistake. He had his legs wrapped, had his hands behind his legs, was off to the right, to his right, to the left of Meerschaert, and then he sidestepped back into the guard when he slammed him. And I go, you're already past the hips. Come out to the side, and you'll land in side control. I don't understand why he did that. I don't know if it's a comfort zone. I think, we talked about he did it against Darren Stewart. He likes being in that Tito Ortiz, sit in the guard, short elbows. I don't know if that's like a comfort zone for him. Well, that's stupid because he got guillotine choke for it, put out. I got nothing else to say about the fight. The fight was very short. What else can you say?
Hey, all I'll say is this. Gerald Meerschaert, twice in his career, he has lost back-to-back fights. When he lost back-to-back fights the first time, he came back, and in the next fight, he choked Trevin Giles all the way to sleep. He had just lost 2 in a row to, I think it was Ian Heinisch and Hamzat Chimaev, comes back, chokes Bartosz Fabinski all the way to sleep. So the moral of the story is, if Gerald Meerschaert is coming off of back-to-back losses, do not take that phone call from Sean Shelby.
There you go. Gerald Meerschaert. And honestly,
or bring a pillow.
He might have been fighting for his job with this fight, so good to him. Before that, Dakota Bush did not have a very good first day on the job in the UFC as he lost a decision to Austin Hubbard. Bush started off great, I thought. I thought the first round was good. I gave him the first round. He came out with a blazing pace, and he just couldn't sustain it. He couldn't sustain the pace. I want to shout out my buddy Dan Tom, MMA Junkie. He made a good point of the wrestlers who come out with throwing hands, the classic wrestler boxers, which Bush is one of them. He made a good point about it happens a lot where wrestlers will come out throwing the hands and they get tired and then they start wrestling and the wrestling doesn't work because you're already tired. And now you're actually wasting your energy on the thing that takes even more energy to do, wrestling. And what surprised me about this was that the era that I didn't expect him to lose was the grappling. I thought he'd be the better grappler. And no, it was Hubbard won the grappling. Hubbard constantly was beating him to what I like to say the point of contact, meaning like when you when you're in scrambling, they'll say like be the high man or win the point of contact. The point of contact being like the highest point where your body's touched. You want to be the highest, like basically king of the mountain. When you're on the mountain, it's a lot. When you're used. I don't know if you guys ever played King of the Mountain when you were a kid and you had like a hill. If you're on the hill, it's much easier to stay on the top than it is to get up and get the guy who's got the momentum. That's how you win scrambles. You want to be at the high point, and he was winning them. So I give him a lot of credit. That said, Dakota Bush took this fight on 1 week's notice. I am going to give him a little bit of pass. What was your thoughts of the fight?
Basically everything you said. I think there might have been a little bit of a combination of octagon jitters and the short notice, probably a pretty extreme sharp weight cut that contributed to him. Yeah, he was just clearly lost the second and third rounds primarily because he was the much more tired guy. I don't know if he would have won them, but I'm betting he would. I bet if these guys fought a year from now after Bush had a couple more UFC fights under his belt, just kind of work out all the wrinkles, I think his ceiling is higher than Hubbard.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he embarrassed himself.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Hubbard was another guy that he might have been fighting for his job, so it was nice of him to keep his job. I think Bush would get a pass, as you said. It's Mr. Dakota Harry Bush. And before that, opened up the card, Tony Gravely versus Anthony Burchak. Gravely won by second round TKO. What a performance by Tony Gravely. I know we talked about Anthony Burchak. Neither one of us were that high at him. Very low UFC level. More like, I feel like he's more like a high regional fighter than a low UFC fighter. But what I loved about Gravely is I've seen improvement. His boxing looks sensational, and that is not what he's known for. His boxing was tight. That short left hook it wasn't a wind up. It was just short. What they always say. You see that. Absolutely fantastic. This guy is improving. Clearly, he might be the guy that he's now 2-0 since going over to American Top Team. He might be the guy that needed a big team. Now I say this all the time, like gyms. Like people say, "Oh, what's the best gym?" Well, that's so deceiving because not everyone fits in the right spot. Somebody could go to American Top Team and flourish. Some people go to American Top Team and they're stuck in the shadows and they don't improve. He seems like the guy that works for. Other guys stay in a little gym, get more focused. That works for you. Him grinding, better for guys in the gym, seems to be working out for him. And shout out to his wife, who's one of his cornermen. She's now won back-to-back fights as a UFC cornerwoman. Compare that to Sam Alvey's wife, who has not got a win in her last 6 times being a cornerwoman.
Yeah. So,
what did you take of Tony Gravely's performance?
His boxing was the big revelation. Like, we already know just kind of how strong and quick he is.
Good wrestler.
I was impressed with his good wrestler, but I was impressed with his poise because I thought he was actually in real trouble when Burchak jumped guard with that guillotine. Like, we've talked about how it's usually not a great idea because if you don't get the guillotine, you're now on your back, and if the other guy is a good enough top position grappler, you've now given away the round. I thought Burchak actually had Gravely in some trouble there, but he
it looked like it. I think Bisping at one point he moved his hand, and Bisping said he's going to tap. He thought about tapping. I actually think you're right.
And despite that, just came back to beat the snot out of Burchak for the rest of the round.
Yeah,
I mean that's just one of those little boxes you want to check when you're watching someone move from a prospect to maybe possibly one day a contender. How they deal with adversity in fight. Like, do they panic? Like, obviously, do they tap and lose right there? But do they panic? Have they blown their gas tank just with nervous energy? Are they shy to pull the trigger afterwards? None of those things. Gravely just got out of it. Kind of dusted himself off and won a fight over somebody he was supposed to beat.
So there you guys have it. We have covered all 10 fights. We also covered the boxing match between Ben Askren and Jake Paul. We'll get to the fun stuff, the Bulls, the Bears, the cut list. Let's start with the cut list. How many do you have for the cut list?
I have, I believe, I have 2 for the cut list.
I have 3. So
let me go
I
first.
continue to be more negative. So guys, the way the cut list works is both me and Ben say who the UFC should cut, no longer should be in the UFC, make room for other people. If they're on both of our lists, they officially go on the Shillan and Duffy cut list. So I have 3. So why don't you tell me yours?
Okay. Starting with the one that I feel most strongly about, Abdulrazak Alhassan. He is now on a 3-fight losing streak. He's really, I mean, you point out that he did have like some sparks of success in the first round against Munir Lazez, but other than that, it's just been a miserable run. He blew weight twice, once really badly last year. He moved up in weight here and doesn't look any better against a guy that you and I both think is just kind of a borderline UFC guy. I feel bad saying it again. He's a friend of a friend, but let's make room for someone else on roster.
Well,
so that's my first one.
He's not a friend of mine, so I'll say it. Yes, he's also on my list. So Abdulrazak Alhassan is officially on the cut list. Who is your other one?
My other one, and I'm not as strong on this one because it was a really close fight, but Justine Kish has lost 4 of 5. The people that she's lost to have, for the most part, not been great shakes. Felice Herrig, Sabina Masso, Gian Firefist. None of them are like tickling the top 15, and she lost to them. Lucy Pudilova is out of the UFC. I could be fine with Justine Kish, moving on.
Yeah, so Kish did not make my list, and that's because of how many people thought she won.
Okay, which is
50-50. A lot of people she was pretty close to getting the biggest win of her career, one of the most massive upsets. So she is saved. I also have 2 other ones that apparently are saved that did not make your list. My first one was Anthony Burchak. 0-2 since his return to the UFC, stopped both times, but you did not have him on your list. And my other one, Bartosz Fabinski. He's lost his last 2. He was finished quickly in both those fights, both by submission. All of it, I think, all but one of his losses in his career by submission. But he has been saved by Ben. So we only had one person, Abdulrazak Alhassan, who was actually on the main card. So we're saying get rid of him. Let's do the Bulls and the Bears. And the Bulls and the Bears are a stock market reference. This is what we say, who had the best days, whose stock rose. That's when it's a bull stock, that's when you have your best day. It's a bear stock is when it's going down. Let's do the Bulls first. And okay. I'll go first this time. So we do a top 3. We do it like hockey style. You go 3, 2, 1. My number 3, whose stock rose, Jessica Pena. A lot of people thought she lost. But the reason why she made it on my list is this is a girl who's been out for 4 years. She was on a losing streak. To do all this, battling all back, fighting USADA. Was one point said she was giving up, decided not to give up, to get back in the UFC, to pull up a massive upset where she was over 2-1. I think she was like almost close to 3-1 on a dog. She won. So Jessica Pena was my number 3 star of the night. My number 2. And I'm sure it'll probably be on your list. How can he not be? Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker, obviously, best fight of his career. You're saying he should get a title shot. Most people are saying get a title shot, former champion. Even his teammate won. Everything went great for Robert Whittaker tonight. So he's my number 2. But my number 1 star is official UFC sponsor, Manscaped. And the reason why they're my number 1 winner is because a hairy bush doesn't win. Manscaped. Brand new sponsor of our radio newscast. That's why Manscaped is my number 1 winner. Ben, who are your 3 Bulls?
I could echo all 3 of yours. So rather than do so, I will give a little love to Tony Gravely. Yeah, he beat someone he was supposed to beat, but as I said, he did things that you want to see out of a prospect on his way up. It's something that one of the things that Bellator does well is give, up and coming prospects winnable yet challenging fights and kind of see how they deal with a little bit of adversity before throwing them to the wolves. This was a perfect example. Gravely passed with flying colors. I want to see him against a better fighter next time. I will throw out Gerald Meerschaert. He's probably never going to creep into the top 15. Just, he's going to be a liability in terms of athleticism against almost anybody in the middleweight division.
Absolutely.
But damn if he isn't dangerous, and damn if he will not make you pay for making dumb mistakes against him. And as long as you can do that, and again, he's never lost 3 in a row in the UFC. He's got a job. Like, he's a guy that's just, we're going to look and we're going to realize he has 25 fights in the UFC and, like 7 or 8 post-fight bonuses. And we're like, when did that happen? And he's going to be that guy. He's just going to hang.
And he now has the record for most submission wins in UFC middleweight history.
There you go.
And that's a division with guys like Damian Maia was in it for a while, Jacare, Talis Leites. Like, there was some good grapplers. So nice. I'm glad someone like him has a record. But sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
I mean, the Michael Jordan of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu
right.
his trade there, or, close to 185. He was within a few pounds of 185 most of the time. And Meerschaert, because he's not a plus athlete, because his game doesn't run on athleticism, he could do this when he's 40. He could have that Damian Maia kind of like, I can still beat some of these people even as I push 40. Yeah. So good for him. Number one, and again, you named 3 that would have made my list, but number 1 that I'm going to throw out here,
Manscaped would have made your list.
Oh, Jacob Malkoun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was hugely down on him for his first fight with Phil Hawes. I was like, this guy's only in the UFC because, he's a buddy of Robert Whittaker. I was hugely down on him tonight. The only unanimous pick in the Sherdog pick'em was Abdul Razak Alhassan over Jacob Malkoun. I and most of us had him by first round knockout. You know what? Jacob Malkoun is talk about a guy who doesn't present as a plus athlete, but guess what? Abdul Razak Alhassan does present as a plus athlete, and Malkoun completely dominated him. He's going to stick around for a while, and that's good. Good for him. Roster needs guys. Those are my Bulls.
All right,
although
let's move.
Again, would have made it.
Yeah, let's move over to the Bears. Now, these are the guys or stories or anything that had a bad night. Again, we do it 3-2-1, 3. Like we do like hockey, 3 stars, number 1 being the best. I'll let you go first this time, Ben.
Juan Espino, bad night for him. An inadvertent knee to the cup forces its fight to a technical decision, and then on top of that, he loses the decision in kind of crummy fashion. I thought he pretty clearly won the first round, and he pretty clearly won the little tidbit of the third round that we got to see. So that kind of sucks. Like, he's 40. If he's going to make a run, even at heavyweight, he really can't afford to lose one. Anybody at heavyweight is, 4 wins away from a title shot. But at 40, you can't give one away. And I will throw out Chase Sherman, man. Like, again, I said this on the preview. Every time I watch Chase Sherman fight, or I think of times I've seen Chase Sherman fight, I'm like, why isn't this guy better? And tonight I figured it out. It's that he doesn't have another gear to engage. Once Arlovsky made a few adjustments, Sherman couldn't adjust back, and he couldn't really step on the gas enough to like decisively put a stamp on the final round. So, Chase Sherman. That's it for my Bears.
All right. So my Bears, I got 3 for you. My number 3, and I pretty much on the list every week. I'm gonna add it again. MMA Rules is a loser again. We had every single time it seems like we're done with crazy MMA rules. There's another one that happens this week. It's always a different one. Now we have the judging of a round that doesn't even get completed. Technical decision. MMA rules had a bad night. My number 2. How about Jeremy Stephens? This is the guy that was set to, co-main event matchup. Instead, he pushes his opponent, who ends up getting injured, leaves Jeremy Stephens without getting paid. Lost some fans because of that. Something that'll be on his legacy forever. He's been memed. His who the F is that guy has been memed to when I push people at the weigh-ins, whatever they don't move or whatever they don't fight. So Jeremy Stephens has turned into a meme. But my number 1 loser of the night is my brain cells, and I'll tell you why. I was watching UFC Vegas 24, and while I was doing that, I had my phone going to the Thriller COD. I watched has-been boxers in action. I watched rappers I didn't know who they were, and pop stars or R&B stars who I didn't know who they were. I saw fat guys slapping each other in the face. I think I had an entire Justin Bieber concert. I got drunk Oscar De La Hoya talking about the USSR. And then I watched a YouTube star knock out a retired MMA fighter who lost his last 2 MMA fights, who had hip surgery, looked to be even worse shape than he was, and knocked him out and he has the worst hands in MMA history, and knocked him out in under a minute. So I spent all that time to see Ben Askren get knocked out in like a minute. So all that stuff killed. My biggest loser was my brain cells tonight, and probably all of society. So that was my biggest loser, the bear. Let's get to the grade. What was your grade for the card?
A really enjoyable main event. Could only bring this one back up to a C for me.
Yeah, I felt the same. I was on its way to a D, and a really good performance by Robert Whittaker. I mean, it was already in a big hole based on all the crap that happened the day before. The start late, the 45 minutes pre stuff before the first fight start. They put themselves in a big hole, but Robert Whittaker saved it, so I give it a C-. So there you guys have it. That is the UFC recap. Oh, let's do this before I forget. I promised I said it. I know you've been looking at the chat. I kind of been writing their names. What was the best pick for who Jake Paul should fight next?
Oh, man. Best? I mean, I certainly like the Charlie Z thing. Like,
yeah,
that's
I like it too. I like that one too.
I mean, that shows kind of like how out of touch I am on YouTube stuff, because I still only thought Charlie Z was like 60-0, and apparently he's now like 339-0. So it's been a few years, but
that's weird. I think I watched him lose like 5 different videos, but somehow he's still undefeated.
I mean, real talk, he would get killed. He's like this 135 pounds soaking wet, like just wuss. But
he's like mentally challenged and stuff.
Well, at least CTE isn't as much of a risk.
Yeah, I like the Diaz, the Nick Diaz, because that one actually could happen. They always talking about boxing. He's a name. I think Nick Diaz, and honestly, at this point, we haven't seen Nick Diaz in action so long. Like, did Jake actually win? Who knows?
You'd probably get your boxing match and your slap fight at the same time too.
Yeah. There you go. Get your slap. Yeah. So there you guys have. We talked about Jake Paul again. That's our recap show. Me and Ben will be back previewing a absolute loaded pay-per-view. We have 3 title fights. We have Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. We have Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade. We have Weili Zhang versus Rose Namajunas, and of course the rest of the card. So, guys, stick around on the Sherdog YouTube page. Make sure you check it out. Check out all the interviews that we've been putting out. Tudor has been interviewing everybody. I throw out some interviews there. Marcelo's been throwing out some interviews. We could continue to build the Sherdog YouTube page. We always have, all the media days for the UFC, for Bellator. We had it for the Thriller card. We have it for One Championship. So we always have that. We have all the content. We believe we have the best content on YouTube. So make sure you check that out. Like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff that me and Ben always forget to tell you to do. And guys, we'll be back recapping the UFC